Well, welcome to our discussion on the aims of scouting. Today I'd like to talk about the aim of fitness. Remember, the aims of scouting are citizenship, fitness, and character development. I'm going to do some talking today, of course. I'm also going to do a little reading. I think it's okay to read to people you care about. I want to share ideas of people that are bigger and better than you with them. You can become a conduit for beautiful ideas. My assistant scoutmaster and great hero, Winston Peter Nelson, often read to us. Of course, my mother read to us. It's so important. That's a great way to share ideas. And I read to my students all the time, and my students like to be read to. And they're high schoolers, and I promise you it's a wonderful adventure for you. So it's some good materials to share that way too. But I like to share some of those things with you today as we talk about fitness. And in scouting, fitness is not just physical fitness, though that's an important part of it. It's in the oath, physically strong, it's right there. But it's also mental, emotional, and spiritual fitness. It's all those things brought together in one great group as we move forward in our lives. And I think the best definition of fitness is simply knowing that you can do hard things. If you're fit, you do hard things, whether it's lifting weights or hiking through the forest. Hiking through the forest is beautiful and wonderful and inspirational. God is to be seen everywhere around you. And yet as you toil back up the hill, up there towards Cardiac Ridge, sometimes a young person will get a little pooped, and he or she will sit down on a rock and look up at the hill ahead, and as their leader comes up sweeping the trail behind, will say, I can't do it. I can't go any farther. But then, after a drink of cool water and a treat perhaps, and an admonition that if they have to be left there alone, they'll probably get eaten by a bear, they head on up to the top of the hill and then back across the river and up into camp. An hour or so later, they're sitting at the dinner table, rejoicing in their strength and their accomplishment, and especially in their fitness, the knowledge that they can do hard things. That's why we hike in scouting. That's why we take challenges in scouting. That's why it's not easy to be an Eagle Scout. That's why it's a challenge to earn your first aid merit badge. But someday you'll save a life, as countless people have. Not only is hiking exciting, but how about that first swim check at Camp Loll? That ice-cold lake high in the top of the Rockies, beautiful, crystal clear, and cold. If you've swum 100 yards in Lake of the Woods, you're bragging about it still to this day. And if you did it in the swim, you probably left the 60-degree water behind a few days later and walked up to Polar Bear Springs, where it's 46 degrees, and took your 10-second sit, and now you really have something to brag on. There was a hard thing you did, and as you leapt out of the water with a squeal and a bellow, depending on your vocal cords, you were proud that you did a hard thing. Doing hard things is important. Speaking of squeals and bellows, this is often the discussion we have with the scout leaders that come to camp in our round table there at the beautiful chapel. You know, the Pope's chapel is beautiful, and I love it, and Michelangelo's ceiling is my favorite part. But as we sit in our outdoor chapel at the end of Lake of the Woods, listening to the calls of the loons and watching the trees bend slightly in the wind, I point out to them that our artist was better. But as we get towards this part of the lesson, this part of my discussion on the aims of scouting, almost as if I planned it, suddenly up from the lake there come squeals and screams and the clanking and smacking of boats. You see, it's swamp day on the waterfront. To earn any of the boating merit badges in scouting, canoeing, kayaking, sailing, rowing, you have to sink the boat and then bring it back up and get it safely into shore. You can do it on your own, or you can do it with the help of another boat, but you have to be able to do it. It's a hard thing. You know what happens to most people when their boat tips over in a 200-foot deep, ice-cold mountain lake? Yeah, they just die. But not the scout. Not the scout who's done it. She knows better. He knows better. They've had the chance. They slosh out the water. They paddle for shore. Or, even better, they put their canoe up on their buddy's boat, drain out a little bit, get back in it, and go on playing because they know they can do hard things. They are fit. Another expensive and exciting adventure, expensive in calories burned and effort put in, are rainstorms. Boy, out in a rainstorm in the top of the mountains, there's nowhere to go. You can't go in the house. You can't hide in the basement. Maybe a little slip of canvas, dining fly between you and the storm, a fire that you have to build and fuel to keep you warm, a hard thing that keeps you safe. You know, the founders of Scouting are many, but among the greatest are Daniel Carter Baird was, with Ernest Thompson Seton, the foundation of Scouting. Seton actually predated Baden-Powell in his youth program. It's a wonderful adventure. But Daniel Carter Baird, who was the first commissioner of the Boy Scouts of America, outlived the rest. At his death, however, his epitaph was written by Edgar Guess, a great American poet. And these are the words that I think epitomize not just Daniel Carter Baird, but the great Scouting program and the great idea of fitness that he was part of creating. Do you fear the force of the wind, the slash of the rain? Go face them and fight them. Be savage again. Go hungry and cold like the wolf. Go wade like the crane. For the palms of your hands will thicken, and the skin of your forehead will tan. You'll go ragged and weary and swarthy, but you will walk like a man. Isn't that a great admonition? That's what we do. We go out and we do hard things. We face the storm, we make it through, and then we know what we can do. You know, I had a great staff member, still a great friend, Jacob Mortensen. His grandfather was a Scout executive who hired me to come back to Loll after I decided I wasn't going to be a professional Scout anymore and went into school teaching. And he was a great man too. But Jacob is a great man. He was on a Mormon mission in July 11th of 2011. And he wrote this letter to the Camp Loll staff. But it applies to all who lead in Scouting. Whether you're a patrol leader in a little troop, or the scoutmaster over 75 boys, or a staff member working there in the beauty of any Boy Scout camp. These words apply to you, though they were written to us, I have to admit. Dear Camp Loll staff, as my companion and I were walking down the street to get to our district meeting after a morning tornado that blocked most of the streets with trees and caused a lot of power loss, a man walking by said, "Isn't it great? Nobody has any power. We're going to have to live like the Amish today." I instantly remembered many young, brave senior patrol leaders battling for victory of a warm fire against the cold, wet rain. The heroism of those young boys will forever remain in my heart, a memorial and illustration of commitment and diligence that is essential. I am confident that the boys who journey to Camp Loll this year will return home as young men. The transformation that occurs in their minds and hearts throughout the week is incredible, and it is all possible because of you. You are their heroes, their leaders, their beacon of truth and virtue standing against an army of malevolence and hardship. My heart rejoices in your success. God is ever watchful and protecting of your precious land and of his sons that journey there. Work hard and enjoy the beautiful wilderness, my brothers. Love, Elder Jacob Mortensen. What a great man he is and was. And like you, he is fighting the battle to teach them how to be fit, how to face difficult things and find joy in success against them, making their lives better and stronger. as they fight evil as well as cold to make their lives better. You know, there are many adventures that come about by doing difficult things. One of the greatest scouters that I ever knew, and I have known an awful lot of great scouters and great people, but one of the greatest of all was Jed Stringham. And Jed Stringham, as we were young, we used to joke about Jed. We used to say, there's a right way and a wrong way and the Jed way. And the Jed way is, if there's a hard way, find it and do it. And Jed would always have us do things the hard way, it seemed to us, but we did it. And we learned that we could do hard things. You know, as I said, scouting has been around for a long time. Before Baden-Powell's book, Scouting for Boys, the premier scouting or youth organization in the world was the Woodcraft Indians, set up by Ernest Thompson Seton. In fact, it was Ernest Seton's program that inspired Baden-Powell to come up with a youth program, which eventually he called Scouting in his book, Scouting for Boys. And then, after a while, President Theodore Roosevelt, brought together Baden-Powell's ideas with Ernest Thompson Seton and Daniel Carter Baird and others, and said, we need a uniform, united youth program for America, and hence the nationally chartered organization of the Boy Scouts of America came into being. However, in the Boy Scouts of America, we never used Baden-Powell's book, Scouting for Boys. Ernest Thompson Seton, who was the first chief scout, he was not a professional, but he was a volunteer like most of us. The first chief scout wrote for us our first handbook, and this is a copy, a modern that you can buy at your local scout store. It's called The Boy Scouts of America Handbook for Boys, and it's full of all kinds of wonderful things. It's back from 1910, and what a wonderful adventure it is. But in it, he talks about some of the hard things that boys back at the turn of the last century, 110 years ago, had to go about doing. And I often like to share these with the scoutmasters as they think about the things that they're teaching their boys to do. Now, we have cars and automobiles and snow to shovel and all those things to face. But how about this one? Runaway horses. The method of checking a horse running away is not to run out and wave your arms in front of him, as this will only cause him to dodge to one side and run faster. But try to run alongside the vehicle with one hand on the shaft to prevent yourself from falling, seize the reins with the other hand, and drag the horse's head towards you. Then, when he has somewhat slowed down by this method, you can turn him towards a wall or a house. He will probably stop. There you go. That's one that we might not get to practice as much as we used to, right? But the next one is really exciting to me. It's called Mad Dog. And of course, a mad dog is one with rabies. And so, since all of us don't have Atticus Finch in the neighborhood, we might have to learn at our scout troop meeting how to deal with rabid, mad dogs. So here is the Boy Scout handbook method. The first thing to do is to kill the mad dog at once. Wrap a handkerchief around your hand to prevent the dog's teeth from entering the flesh, and grasp a club of some kind. If you can stop the dog with a stick, you should hit him hard over the head with it or kick him under the jaw. A handkerchief held in front of you in your outstretched hand will generally cause the dog to stop and paw at it before he attempts to bite you. This will give you an opportunity to kick him under the lower jaw. Another way suggested is to wrap a coat around the left arm and let the rabid dog bite it. Then with the other hand, seize the dog's throat and choke him. Of course, that's how 12-year-olds would do it. And So if you don't think we have too many challenges to live with today, you might go back and look at the challenges they had to deal with in the past. We are facing a lot of challenges here at the beginning of June in 2020, but I beg you to take some time to consider history. Go back over the Great Depression, the World Wars, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, all the challenges that we have faced in the past, all the hard things that we have done, and remind yourself and all who you love how fit we are. This is a time for fitness. This is one of the aims of scouting. You know, years ago, in fact, it was in 1993, I got a call from Wade Cox, who had been a professional scout, that Harvey Mortensen had said to keep an eye on us being my beautiful wife Janice and me up at Camp Loll our first year back after we had retired from scouting and left Treasure Mountain behind. At the end of the year, he actually showed me his letter to Harvey. He said, "You sent me here to keep an eye on the camp director." The camp director didn't need watching, which was always comforting to me. I think it was about 8 years later, we had gone up for a year at Aspen Ridge at Hull Valley, and what a beautiful camp that was, full of challenges, full of adventures. But just as in the weeks before we were to head up to Aspen Ridge, I got a call from Wade Cox, and he had been transferred down to Pasadena, California, and he wanted to know if we would like to come and direct Camp Cherry Valley. Now, this was an odd thing to me, because years before, when I had gone to National Executive Institute in New Jersey at Camp Schiff, I had met the camp director. In those days, that was back in 1976, the camp director from Cherry Valley. And he had talked to me about the Garibaldi, these beautiful golden fish that swim all around the docks. And I had just had a dream where I had stood on a dock looking down into crystal blue water like we have at Camp Loll, and there were big goldfish swimming around in it. I knew I was the camp director there, but I didn't know why I was. And then here comes this call. Would you like to come and direct Camp Cherry Valley? We'd already put our staff together for Aspen Ridge, and I said I made my promises. I told them I would come and we're going to be there. He says, well, when will we have to call you next fall in order to get your commitment? And I said, oh, 1st of September. On September 1st, we got the call. Was really excited. He wanted us to come down and check out Cherry Valley. And so Janice and I headed down there at autumn break and found ourselves on a boat coming up into Cherry Cove. Well, actually, we came into two harbors, and then we were driven over to Cherry Cove and down into Cherry Valley. It was a bit of a disappointment. As a boy growing up in Alaska, I'd been to those beautiful lush green islands off the coast of Alaska. And that's what I was kind of imagining in my mind, because the only other part of California I'd ever been to was the redwood groves and Yosemite. But here we were in a desert island. It was kind of like Antelope Island, you know, by the sea there was, instead of in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. The people there were nice, but the camp was in terrible condition. It was worn down, the trails ran everywhere, and it was not in good shape. And it was explained to me by the folks who met us how the camp was losing money, and they were on the verge of having to lose it, sell it, give it up, if we couldn't bring it back. And they wanted us to do that. Well, we thought about it, and when we returned home after a kayak trip out on the lake, I used to call it the lake, and they would get mad at me. It's really the Pacific Ocean. I used to tell them that the waterfront at Cherry Valley was so big that Japan was in it, but we paddled out there off Cherry Cove and looked down into that crystal water, every bit as clear as Lake of the Woods, but full of life. You know, on the land, there are plants everywhere you look, but only occasionally do you see an animal, a bird or a mammal or something skittering through the brush. But in the sea, when you look down, it's full of animals everywhere. Of course, fish swimming, but every rock is covered with animals. It's an amazing experience, and so we were enjoying that. We came back home, and my children informed me that they had been thinking about it, and they had determined that we were to go to Camp Cherry Valley. Well, I was interested, but I did give a condition. After my discussion with some of the people down there, I'd come to the conclusion that the biggest problem with Camp Cherry Valley had been the staff. Staff is always the secret to success, and I told them that I would want to be the sole choice maker of who the staff would be. It took them 2 weeks to make up their mind, but Mr. Booker, the Scout executive, called and said they would accept my condition on the condition that I would interview the staff who had been there the year before, which I did. I was glad to do that. In fact, we showed up an hour or so early and spent some time with many of them and some of the other important people from Pasadena Council there in the Scout office, talking about our plan, our program for Camp Cherry Valley. Of course, we got a lot of arguments. They were particularly upset about the Camp Totem, which they said sounded more like Cub Scouts. And they didn't like the word Camp Friend because they said that sounded too silly too. But those were important things to me, and I just smiled and went on about it. And then after our opening meeting, I soon found myself interviewing downstairs some of the very same people that had been telling me I was going to be a failure. Jody Oram, my assistant at the time, and still to this day was there with me, and telling us how we were going to fail, were now sitting before us asking for a job to work with us. Well, it became obvious as I interviewed the fellow who had been the program director the year before that he was not going to come back to Cherry Valley. And as he got ready to leave the room, he looked at Jody and I, and he said, "You poor little Utah boys. You have no idea what you're getting into. These California kids are tough, and they're going to kill you." And then he turned and walked out of the room and out of my life for the most part, which was kind of a relief. Do you think he scared me? You bet he did. I was petrified. It was months later. We had come out to Camp Cherry Valley with 35 Camp Loll staff members and Aspen Ridge staff members and other great young people that we had been able to hire from California. And we headed back out there to Cherry Valley and started to build our camp and get everything organized and ready to go. And I think we did a great job. Things were running well, though difficult and challenging, but we were fit. And then on a day, the boat arrived. At Cherry Valley, all the scouts come together at one time on a big ferry boat from Los Angeles, and they land at 2 harbors, and then the staff is there to meet them and organize them into troops and walk them in about 3/4 of a mile down the road and down into their campsites, and their leaders come and check in. It's a very busy and exciting Sunday morning, but it was Saturday. It was actually, I think it was a Sunday morning, but something that we always look forward to. But on this particular day, as I looked down, they came down the trail from the road, cutting out the big swing. They came down past the campfire bowl, walked across the beautiful beach, past all the yachts, and then right up the middle of the Salina towards my office up there in the warehouse. But I was waiting for them, fear in my heart and mind. This was the first group I would ever see. I had conjured up in my mind a kind of picture of what those tough California kids would look like. They would all have their hair spiked down the middle and dyed different color. They would be wearing their gang outfits. They would be tormenting my staff members, and it would be a terrible and hideous thing as they came into camp, and it would be like trying to control wild beasts, even evil beasts for an entire... Oh, gee, I was scared. I crept down to the very corner of the dining hall, and I peeked out around it. Once the radio call had come in, "They're in camp," and I peeked around the corner, and there coming up towards me, up the Salina Trail, were the toughest bunch of kids I've ever seen in my entire life. And they looked just like any group of beautiful scouts you've ever seen. Maybe better than some. They were all in full uniform. They had their troop flags. They were following their senior patrol leaders. Their scoutmasters were walking by their sides. They were supporting and getting to be friends with and interacting with our camp staff as they headed past me and on up into the campsites in the beautiful cherry grove. You see, what it is to be a tough kid is to live in the world that we live in, whether it was 1994 or 2020, to live in this world we live in and still live up to the values of scouting, to the oath, law, motto, and slogan. That's what it is to be tough. So I hope that you will work hard to make yourself tough by doing hard things. And if you ever get a chance to work with others, whether it be family or friends, but particularly if they be scouts, that you teach them how to do hard things so that they will know they can. Best of luck to you. I know you can do hard things. Thank you.